Thanks for joining this conversation with me. I definitely thank you for taking your time to do this.
You're welcome. I think this is important to make sure we shed light on professionals like myself,
Mhm.
a clinical social worker, and the role that we have played during this pandemic, and the role that we're continuing to play now that the pandemic is not necessarily over, but we're not in the height of it, but still the rippling effects of kind of what we all experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. So, since I guess the start of the pandemic, how do you think that social working and the things that you do on a daily basis, how do you think that stuff changed since the start of the pandemic?
Well, in my role, I work with older adults. So that's the population that I service. And prior to the pandemic, I was, going out to the homes, seeing what resources we could provide, the elderly, which is kind of the most vulnerable population, out there, one of the most vulnerable populations, the elderly and disabled. So just going out there and not only kind of seeing what resources are available, like Meals on Wheels or caregiver assistance, things like that, but also doing some therapy because, a lot of times, people who have those, all those things going on with their health and things like that, it could kind of come overwhelming for them and they just kind of want to talk about it. So even prior to the pandemic, that vulnerable population of, older adults and people with disabilities, there always was a need. So during the pandemic, you saw that need become even greater, right? Because they are the ones at higher risk for, getting COVID. So they were very, very scared about leaving the house, very scared about letting people in the house, but there's still that need of them needing the services. So how do we address that of, hey, I can't go to the grocery store, but I still need to, get food and I still need to, get my medications, but I don't want to go out. I'm really scared. So, I saw a lot of, that with that population during the pandemic of just, not being able to access those resources that they would normally be able to access, but also those resources being limited.
Yeah.
So people who would probably normally be able to come out and bring them meals and Meals on Wheels and things like that, they're not able to come out and bring that food. Or there's a greater demand now, so the resources are scarce because everybody needs it, right? So a lot of people can't get out, so there's a greater need. So that population where it kind of was designated for them at one point, now everybody needs it, so it comes a little bit more scarce.
Yeah. So I guess with all that, all those things happening all at once, I know that it's probably created some new barriers for, you as a social worker as well. Like, what are some of those barriers, those new barriers that the pandemic also created while you were trying to, facilitate your job also?
So I think the barriers were definitely the lack of resources, that were available. So I mentioned before, like Meals on Wheels or something like that, which is already a 1 to 2 year wait list in some counties, right?
Yeah.
So then we have a lot more people trying to access, those resources. It may not be Meals on Wheels, but it may be needing, families needing food because they had lost their jobs. So we don't realize like all of those resources kind of come from those funding come from the same pot of money sometimes. So if something has to take from here, it's taken from somewhere else, right? So, we find that a lot of those resources, were not there. And if they were there, so many people are trying to access it that it's kind of comes just a survival of the fittest type, to get those resources. So what about people who, needed a caregiver in there, who are, totally disabled, who need somebody to come help them and things like that? That's a resource, and that's funding, and those resources were scarce because a lot of times those caregivers that a lot of people depend on, they didn't want to come out It was, COVID was going on and a lot of people didn't want people coming in. So it was just a lot of things, happening where people really weren't getting the assistance that they needed. And even for the people who probably didn't need the meals and things like that, it still was the social isolation aspect of it, right? Yeah. So not being able to, let's say, go see family and friends. So that mental disconnect, emotional disconnect from being able to see, family, friends, that normal interaction, especially for older adults. We don't realize how important that is, right? 'Cause they don't have, going to a job and interacting with coworkers and, so that interaction with family and friends is sometimes all they have, and that was gone.